Grateful to be completing our adventure in faith today. Finding true waters is our message today. Finding the true waters. Ralph Waldo Emerson, our philosophical forefather of our philosophy, he said, "That is always best which gives me to myself." That is always best which gives me to myself. Does that resonate with you? Sure the hell does resonate with me. Let's say it together. That is always best which gives me to myself. What for you are those activities, those practices, those relationships that help you to feel yourself again? Because I want you to know they're the secret to living a great life. I don't know about you, but when things are challenging, I tend to blame myself. Anybody else do that? I think there's something wrong with me. And that's why this challenge is taking place in my life. But if we could only make that little switch to see that what is really going on is that a greater version of ourselves is being called forth. It's not being who I am that's messing things up. It's not being enough of who I am that's causing me this challenge. We forget sometimes that when we don't think for ourselves, we let someone or something else do the thinking for us. Doesn't that scare you a little bit? It scares me, especially in election time when we know people whose job is to get us to not think for ourselves. If we don't feel for ourselves, we allow the perceived feelings or fears about other people become the center of our life. And when we don't prioritize for ourselves, we let anyone and anything set the priorities for us. We lose ourselves. And thus it is so important to be able to recognize that which allows us to get back to being who we are. Sometimes it's doing something playful or relaxing. Sometimes it's making intimate connections, having conversations with people here in your spiritual community at Mile High Church. Sometimes it's learning to re-engage in a meaningful spiritual practice. If you ever take a class with me here at Mile High Church, you've probably heard me say, if you get anything out of this teaching and your time and this philosophy, I pray it is a daily spiritual practice. There is no greater way I know that gives me back to myself, that allows me to find those true waters, to look within them, and to see my true self looking back at me. A former Trappist monk with Thomas Merton and psychologist by the name of James Finley, he had a definition of spiritual practice that works for me. It goes like this: it is any act habitually entered into with your whole heart as a way of awakening, deepening, and sustaining a contemplative experience of the inherent holiness of the present moment. I love that. The inherent holiness of the present moment. By caring for ourselves, by going to our own well, we unlock an experience of the divinity. By taking care of ourselves, we reveal our relationship with a higher power. By nurturing our being, we bring forth the spirit of our becoming. And what I recommend for everybody in terms of spiritual practice is to first look at those traditional spiritual practices. Those that come to us from religion and from family and ancestry. Things like meditation, prayer, forgiveness, gratitude, yoga, creating an altar, Tai Chi. Always find a couple of these that work really well for you. But don't forget about those secular spiritual practices as well. Those things you may engage in on a daily or weekly basis, that if you could bring more of a reverence for that holy that is in the present moment, could also expand your sense of spiritual life. Exercising, listening to music, having a good conversation, listening to a podcast, these things sometimes that we don't think are going to create any material good for us, actually put us back in touch with being a soul so that we can live fully and wholly again. Sometimes it's as simple as just being willing to set any plans aside for the day and just bump around, just be. One of the most important periods of my life was a little under 2-year stint that I lived in San Diego, California. And I was not happy with what led me there. I had become a minister, and my first ministry was a total failure. It was not only a failure in starting a business for me, it was also created a crisis of faith. I had ended a relationship. Have you ever been in one of those relationships where you're on the train and you see that it's about to crash, and for some reason you say, I think it's a good idea to stay on this train? So that's what I did, and it went boom. And I was lucky to get offered a job in San Diego. I was also not taking care of my body. I was smoking and drinking and not eating right. And the most wonderful thing happened in San Diego. I got to be in my own energies again. I got to live alone for a little while. I got to get back to my spiritual practice. San Diego was just this great place to walk. So I just bumped around here or there. And I probably accomplished nothing of great material good in those 2 years, but I came back to myself. I rediscovered my interiority. I got back to my center, and when we get back to our center, it sets the creative process into motion. And I can tell you, if it wasn't for that time, I would not have been capable of becoming a successful minister. I would not have been capable of becoming a good husband or father. I wouldn't have understood the importance of a commitment to thriving and well-being. So doing nothing, being back in my own energies, created a path for me to fulfill my purpose in career and in personal life and in personal health. I get to start teaching a class about the great Joseph Campbell here in a few weeks, and it's kind of a full circle experience for me. The class is called The Art of Living, and what it really is it's about what happens when you learn to live from your own center. And I made the class up right when the pandemic hit in and we all stayed at home. It was great marketing. Let's have an online class. We're all stuck at home. You kind of have to come. And I don't know how well the class went because I just made it up. But the idea was we're heading into survival times. And Campbell teaches us that when the world seems to be falling apart, there's only one thing you can hold on to, and that's your bliss. What you love to do, what makes you happy. Hold on to that and you'll be okay. And recreating or refining the class for coming up, it helped me to see that quote in a different way. That holding on to our bliss is actually how we bring the world together. Holding on, discovering, cultivating, and practicing our bliss is actually how we pull our lives together. By giving ourselves back to ourselves through those activities and practices that matter, it gives us everything we need, not only to confront the challenges, but to step into the potential things to celebrate in our thriving. Speaking of this idea of just wandering, of just bumping around, Campbell shares, those were glorious experiences. I was just flopping around, sniffing out what I would do and what I wouldn't do. I only wanted to do what made sense to my interior. I don't see how one can live otherwise, and nothing is better than reading when there is nothing else to do. Now, I would love to prescribe that you all take a month off of work, family obligations, and just bump around. And I realize that for many of us that's not possible, but even better reason to find a couple times in the day to do that which is best for giving yourself back to yourself, for remembering who you are, for recalling your spirit and realizing you don't just have a soul that exists somewhere, but that you are a soul living this human life for a reason. Find those spaces in your life so that your life isn't something you have to escape to get back to your center, but is a daily example and expression of what it means to live from your center. Because when we're not living from our own center, we're living from something else. And I promise you that something else is not good. It's not good. It's not your way. It's not your path. It's not your flow. It's not you. And if there's anything that might be missing from your life today, trust me, it's you. It's you. Campbell goes on. When you wander, think of what you want to do that day. Not what you told yourself you were going to want to do. Don't think of new things. Don't think of achievement. Don't think of anything of the kind. Just think, where do I feel good? What is giving me joy? There's an old Sufi story, Sufism being the mystical branch of Islam, where a king calls in an advisor. His kingdom is struggling, and he's looking for advice. And the advisor says, my great king, you are like a fountain, and your kingdoms are the streams. And the king's not quite understanding. What are you trying to say? He said, well, if you were dying of thirst in the desert, and someone offered you a glass of water for half of your kingdom, would you give it to him? And the king said, I suppose I would. And if you drank that water, and an hour later someone else told you that it was poisoned, and he would give you the antidote for the other half of the kingdom, what would you do? I suppose I would give it to him. Why then, the advisor said, would you pay so much attention to that which is only worth a glass of water? Only worth an antidote. We get so caught up in the state of our kingdom, in the state of our affairs, trying to hold everything together, trying to fix and patch those holes, forgetting that it's our own fountain, our own needs, our own well-being. If we can take care of those, that's right. Thank you for that, amen. We can set our life into motion. Campbell continues, I mean it. It's simply basic. Get those pressure ideas out of your system, and then you can find, like a ball on a roulette wheel, where you are going to land. The roulette ball doesn't say, well, people think better of me over there than over here. Take what comes and be where you like. What counts is being where you feel you're in your place. What people think is their problem. What if the correct response to a challenge is to do what you love? What if, when you're struggling at your most, the message is do what you love? It doesn't mean live in avoidance of the problem or the challenge. It means get back to yourself first, and you will have everything that you need to walk through and transform that challenge. The great Carl Jung was in the middle of a midlife crisis. He's in the middle of his 40s, and he's wanting to write, and he's developing all of this depth psychology, and he's feeling stuck. And he asked himself kind of a silly question, what did I love to do as a child? And the answer was play with rocks. And so he said, okay, I'll try it. So here's this 45-year-old man going into the forest, getting on his knees and playing with stones, playing with rocks. Eventually, he'd become a master stonemason and build his own home. And he shares that there was some sort of dormant energy within him, some part of his spirit that had fallen asleep, or he had fallen asleep too, that became awakened, that all of a sudden filled him with a sense of creative vitality. And because of that practice, he shares, he was able to go on and write his great works about the shadow and archetypes and personality types and all of these things that we have so much interest in today. Just by moving into that spirit of play. Is there an activity that is meaningful to you? Perhaps that you haven't allowed yourself to embark in or engage in quite a while because you are so busy and have so much to get done. That if you could just put things down for a little bit and get back to that, you get back to yourself and back to that creative energy that wants to move you forward. In the fountain of our lives, in the river of our lives, I would love to say that everything always feels full. But the truth of it is that some of us feel flooded and some of us feel empty. How many people these days like me feel flooded? I think election season can do that to us. You're flooded when you're feeling like yourself, but you're taking on everything, even all of the world's problems. You're feeling them right there on your shoulders, and you feel that it's flood time, that there's no self-control, that the flow is running past you, and it's overwhelming. When we're empty, that's how many of us feel empty? Thank you. Honest group. It means that we've given all of our energy to supporting everything and everyone but ourselves. That we've allowed ourselves to run dry, and we've forgotten that if we don't take care of ourselves first, we cannot properly meet the spiritual, emotional, and physical needs of others. And we have that experience of drought, which feels not like solitude, but a kind of sad isolation. The great mystic Howard Thurman has some advice for those of us who feel flooded or empty. He said, "The answer to the flood time of the river is a greater opening to the sea. The answer to the drought of the river is a larger opening from the sea. The sea is the answer both to the drought and the flood time of the river. The sea is our source, is that place where we meet God and we allow the divine to meet us as well. The sea is that place that is always around us, but we forget it and get so caught up in our own idea of flow, of our own sense of the amount of water that we have, that we forget that those true waters are always provided through us if we open up to allowing them into our lives. Remembering in the sense that that wholeness of who we are is always there. In our Adventures in Faith material this week, there's a little exercise where you're invited to write a little note to yourself in past time. Remember writing notes? Remember writing letters? This isn't a text message thing, not an email. Write an actual note. You're encouraged to a time in your past. I wrote to that part of me that was suffering before I went to San Diego. And I told him, Josh, I want you to know that letting go isn't failure, that it's okay to let go, and that real failure comes when we try to control, when we're unwilling to move on in the direction that life is pointing us to. The second part of the exercise is to imagine a future self that's writing to you where you are right now. In the midst of a challenge, in the midst of a celebration, what is it that you think your future self would want you to know? My future self says, Josh, give yourself a little bit more credit. You're trying really, really hard. In your work, in your family, in your personal life, take a deep breath and know that everything is going to be okay. What does that wholeness of your future self want you to know about where you might better be in relationship with who you are in the midst of whatever the uncertainties in your life may be? Thurman goes on, speaking of our flow, the flow of the sea into the river of our lives, it may twist and turn, fall back on itself and start again, stumble over an infinite series of hindering rocks. But at last, the river must answer the call of the sea. It is restless till it finds its rest in the sea. Where's the sea calling you in your life? To get back to source, to get back present, to open yourself up to that greater experience of that incredible spiritual power, the only spiritual power that is, yet wants to express as the spiritual power that is who you are, the treasure, the gift, the jewel of your spirit and your vitality that your life is longing for. Campbell talks about the experience of finding our jewel, that beautiful jewel that you discover in sacred space and in sacred time, and this thing, he calls it being the master of two worlds, where you now have to take it back into the world. You're called to bring it into the world because the world needs who you are. Your loved ones need who you are. Your life needs who you are. And he says we have three choices when we discover that jewel and we're called to go back into the world, what T.S. Eliot sometimes termed the wasteland. And the first is the refusal of the call, which says, screw it, I'm moving to the woods. I'm going to stay with this feeling of being myself, and that's all I'm going to do. So that's refusal of the call. The second is refusal of the jewel, by looking out at the world and the wasteland saying, what do other people want me to be? What's going to help this person think better than me? How can I present myself in a superficial way to keep this person calm or make this situation okay? And when we do this, we refuse the gifts that we've discovered and been given. Lastly, we can enter back into that original world and become the master of two worlds, where we give our jewel with authenticity, with transparency, and with a willingness to grow. And what I have come to believe is that when we do just that, even in challenging times, it's like a vitamin C for our lives. When we stay committed to our true self and bringing that into our relationships and into our work and do all that we do, it's only practical, but it's also the greatest magic that there is. To realize that within you, within your own center, by owning who you are in your own interior, your life begins to fall into line, your vision becomes into view, and the day-to-day adventure is no longer something to control, but an adventure to enjoy. So moving into prayer as we close this Adventures in Faith, I invite any of our incredible practitioner prayer partners to stand and hold consciousness, just honoring our incredible spiritual community here in the sanctuary and everyone watching online as well. Let's again become aware of the affect of being given back to ourselves, of returning to the place of our beginning and realizing it is also the place of our eternality. That although we may have gotten caught up searching in the world for something to complete us, something to make us acceptable in someone else's eyes, we remember that it's been right here within us all along. That learning to trust ourselves, that finding joy in getting to know ourselves, in taking the time to articulate feelings grand and even decrepit, we communicate and bring forth our authenticity, realizing that when we do, it sets forth the creative medium into action. And our life begins to become filled with what may have felt like it was missing: a sense of deep healing, a profound flow and coherence, of a sense of resonance, reverence, and deepening with our very lives. The ability to enjoy the moment in its fullness, and also to have the optimism for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our country, that better and better things are in store. Opening ourselves to the treasure and the gift of ourselves, we find our true waters are not as far away as we may have thought, that they're right here with us, moving us onward into grander and grander experiences of this beautiful thing called life. And so it is. Amen.